Welcome back to BLOCKTV. It's time now for Stress Test. And in the cryptosphere, the two biggest drivers seem to still be fear and greed. With emotions running the show, there is a serious need for the industry to develop more accurate metrics. But fortunately, we have a man who can help us to understand things from a new perspective. The Thai co-founder Joshua Frank, whose proprietary sentiment data breaks down how the millions of people who make up the cryptosphere feel about where the markets are headed. And today we have a special treat with Joshua Frank joining us right here in our studios of BLOCKTV. Joshua, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome, and it's a pleasure to have you here in studio.
Yeah, it's nice to finally be here. It's been a lot of times over over a Zoom meeting, so it's nice to finally make it in.
Exactly, face to face. All right, and since we've got you here, I think an important place to start, before we delve into some of the important analytic trends that we're seeing at the moment, just to give a refresh and a breakdown for our audiences of what the sentiment data is and why it's so critical to understanding how the cryptosphere particularly works.
Yeah, so sentiment data is something that really started to take force in traditional asset classes about a decade ago, with the idea that people on social media can help us understand where the markets are moving, right? If somebody is making a post, that correlates in some capacity to movement within an actual market. So for example, if somebody's talking about Apple stock, and people are more bullish or bearish about Apple, that may correlate with movement. And what we found, previously we had worked in other asset classes. When we started moving into crypto, we found that was even more so the case. With Apple, for example, you have revenue, you have earnings, you have dividends, you have things that are fundamentally driving the value of that asset. But in crypto, that doesn't exist. The only thing that really moves cryptocurrencies are still the wisdom of the crowd and pumps on Twitter and people getting excited about a coin. We went over this a couple weeks ago, but Chainlink, people got really excited about Chainlink. Conversations started to increase, and we saw that 6 or 7 months ago, and all of a sudden the price, went up like crazy. You look at Tron and the meeting being canceled between Justin Sun and Warren Buffett. All of a sudden sentiment on Twitter basically plummeted afterwards, after the meeting was canceled the other day, and then price followed, going down 20%. So it's an extremely correlated metric, and we think the most correlated metric with movement within the asset class.
All right, so I mean, just to really stress there, more so than other asset classes, really you have the power of sentiment data right there in the cryptosphere, still something that really makes the market move, correct?
Yeah, I mean, by far, right? Like if you're a quantitative hedge fund in another asset class and you're trying to understand Walmart and Walmart stock, you may get sentiment data on how people feel about Walmart. You may install satellites over a Walmart parking lot to look at the number of cars in the parking lot. There are a lot of different things that you're doing as a quantitative hedge fund in a traditional asset class. You're building multi-factor models to predict movement within the market. Within crypto, we've seen that you don't really need to build the multi-factor models because sentiment in and of itself predicts movement of the market. So we are convinced that it is by far the best data point and the best metric in crypto, and that it explains, while not all of the movement, a very significant percentage of the movement within the asset class.
Well, given that important setup in line, the critical nature of sentiment data to the cryptosphere and this asset class as a whole, let's take a look at 5 notable quarterly trends, starting with number 5, tweet volumes rebounding. All right, Josh, what can you tell us?
Yeah, so we had seen basically from Q4 2017 until now, tweet volumes fall month over month. So we can see the chart, which is shown on the screen now. So we see the light blue line there is the percentage change in tweets, and the blue line is the actual tweet volume. So we saw over the last 4 quarters, the percentage change in tweets decreased considerably month over month. Finally, in Q2 2019, we saw it rebound once again. So tweets actually went up about 30% in Q2 2019. So it was the biggest change in tweet volume from an upward or downward point of view since at least 2017. And there were 2 occasions actually in Q2 where we saw, 9 occasions in Q2 where we had seen over 40,000 tweets. We hadn't seen that in over 3 quarters. So it was very interesting to see. And we also saw over 70,000 tweets on June 26, 2019. And that's the first time we had seen over 70,000 tweets since sometime in 2017, so it was over 500 days. So, and what we're seeing in Q3 is that this trend is really continuing. So tweet volumes in Q3 are up about an additional 15%, in early numbers on Q2. So we're seeing a significant amount of users, Twitter users coming back in and talking about the crypto, and we're seeing that correlate with increased trading volumes within the market.
Are we seeing that just to look in the most recent movement, even despite the current dip that we're seeing, or that's still?
Yeah, so we're seeing that the trend is continuing. So, it's not as high. The Libra announcement and Donald Trump tweeting about crypto, definitely, played a significant role, and it helped a lot. But Q3 has been, a couple weeks so far, and I think the number of tweets in Q2 is about 30,000 a day. In Q3, we're seeing that at about 35,000 a day already. So despite Libra and Trump and all that, I think, happening in Q2, we're seeing that trend continue, which is a very positive sign.
Certainly, it does seem to be some bullish signs for the market as a whole. Now, moving on to our number 4 point, an interesting point to note of the Bitcoin tweet dispersion. Now, that's percentage of tweets coming from unique Twitter accounts. You've got some interesting stats there, I understand.
Yes, so the percentage of tweets coming from unique Twitter accounts basically means that, for example, 50% of tweets are coming from unique Twitter users. So what we had seen throughout 2018, while volatile, is that generally the percentage of tweets coming from unique Twitter users was decreasing. So in addition to the number of tweets going down, they were increasingly coming from less and less people. But on June 22nd, we actually saw an all-time high in terms of dispersion. So 57% of crypto tweets were coming from unique Twitter accounts. And we've seen that trend has continued, right? And more and more people continue to talk about the coin. And as a higher percentage of tweets come from unique accounts and the number of tweets continue, that means that there are more and more people talking about the coin, right? Because you're seeing increased tweet volume plus tweets coming from a lot of different accounts. So we actually saw, I think, tweets coming from about 18,000 accounts, and that was the first time that happened since early 2018. So the bull run of 2017 and then into a little bit of 2018, saw a big increase in the number of people talking about cryptos. And that slowly went down as the market dropped by 60-70%. But we're seeing that number is rebounding significantly to early 2018, when the price of Bitcoin was at $13,000-$14,000.
And just to touch on a point for the sake of our audience members here, now I'm correct in saying that your sentiment data accounts for the fact that you look for real accounts, should I say? I mean, because obviously some would speculate if there's more increased unique accounts that a lot of bots are out in the system, but you actually take account for that in your system, correct?
Yeah, so we have proprietary metrics for parsing through bot accounts. So for example, if somebody's account is John123456789, we recognize that's a bot account. We look at the length of time that the account has been in existence for. We also look at how historically accurate the account has been. So for example, if somebody pushes out a positive tweet on Bitcoin, what is the impact of that over a day, over a month, over a year? If somebody pushes out a negative tweet, how accurate are they a day later, a month later, a year later in terms of the price of that asset moving negative? So there are about 10 different things that we look at. So we're able to weed out a lot of the bot accounts and a lot of the quote unquote armies that are in crypto Twitter trying to pump the value of a coin.
And what percentage of the market are you seeing, do you have the access to, that are bots? I mean, are there a lot of bots taking place in this sphere?
Yes.
I don't think that answer would surprise anyone.
We weed out about 90 to 95% of tweets, so
wow.
It's really significant.
Yeah, very significant numbers, but still a good significant number of real Twitter accounts.
Yeah, and we're seeing that number increasing. We're seeing that the percentage of real tweets. I mean, what you can see, and you can see this on our site if you go to the ta.io, we have metrics that look at basically something called tweet volume dominance, which is the percentage of tweets about a particular cryptocurrency out of the total amount of tweets within the crypto sphere. And you can actually see, if you sort by that column on our coins page, you can see there are some coins that shouldn't be there, and that's usually because they have a high number of
90 to 95%, though, I gotta say that number is pretty staggering. That does bear in line with a lot of reporting about wash trading that's come from other.
We had 87% on wash trading, and
it's pretty incredible to see those sort of numbers. I mean, do you know if those numbers are reflected in other asset classes?
No.
Or is this something unique to the crypto sphere?
Crypto's the Wild West, right? You see. The amount of, you still see scams. I remember Vitalik had to change his name to non-giver of ETH because everybody was trying to, basically scam people into giving away Ethereum. It's still early on, but it's pretty easy to tell. I mean, there are also a lot of Twitter accounts of cryptocurrencies and companies. These cryptos you've never heard of have 70,000 Twitter followers. We both know that that's not right. They're paying for accounts. But we don't see it anywhere else. But it's getting better. It's slowly, but it's getting better.
Certainly, we'll have to fight that good fight to make it get better. But now let's move to our number 3 point, which is that volatility, always a big word in the crypto sphere as a whole, but in regarding sentiment data, we're seeing a decrease, correct?
Yeah, which is actually really interesting, because the way that our daily sentiment scores work is daily sentiment score looks at the sentiment today versus a 7-day moving average. So if sentiment, so to have a positive sentiment score, that has to mean that sentiment today is higher than sentiment over the last 6 days. So continued increases in positive sentiment mean that conversations become increasingly and increasingly and increasingly positive. So we're now seeing a trend where conversations have stayed pretty positive and the volatility in sentiment is at its lowest point that it's ever been at, which means that conversations are continually becoming more positive. So we've seen some slight dips and the push below $10,000 a few times hasn't really helped the case, but from a longer term point of view, we're seeing that sentiment is becoming increasingly and increasingly more positive. And if we look at this next chart here, you can see the days that Bitcoin had positive and negative sentiment. And if you look at Q1 through Q4, it's pretty even in terms of the number of days with positive and negative sentiment. But looking at Q1, Q2, and early Q3, you can see that green bar, which is days of positive sentiment, are significantly outweighing days of negative sentiment, which means that those conversations are becoming more and more positive. And as more users are coming into the space, they're more positive than the users that were there previously, which is very interesting and a very good sign for the coin.
And break down a little bit for us. I mean, how do you determine what's a positive and what's a negative tweet when it comes to this sort of sentiment?
So we actually have a dictionary of tens of thousands of words, and each tweet, every single word is individually scored. So if we see that Bitcoin sees surge in tweet volume, on increase in OTC trading, the word surge, for example, would be scored positively. So what we're doing is we're basically summing up all of the positive and there could be some positive and some negative words in individual tweets, right. But what we're doing is we're basically summing up the value of every single word in every tweet and creating aggregate metrics for each coin. And what we do is we don't compare one coin versus another, we compare a coin versus itself. Because, as you mentioned before, a lot of coins have bot accounts. So the issue is, when a coin has a bot account, its conversations may tend to be more positive than another coin's. So it's not fair to compare those conversations to another. Mm-hmm. What we care about is when there are trends, right? When are the conversations on XRP becoming more positive than XRP in the past? When are conversations on Bitcoin becoming more positive than Bitcoin in the past? And we're doing that by scoring words in each individual tweet and creating aggregate scores and looking back over time.
And now, I guess I want to ask as well, and this can be tough even for people to do, but are you able to tell for trolls and sarcasm? Are you able to factor those elements in, or is that a bit difficult given?
Yeah, we have some capability to do that, but you're obviously not going to be perfect. But when we're scoring hundreds of thousands of tweets a day, the sample size is large enough that it weeds out a lot of that.
The aggregate. And you're able to do this, I understand, in multiple languages, or is this just for limited to English?
So we're working on supporting some more languages. Right now, we're doing we're parsing through about 850 million tweets a day right now. So it's a pretty significant.
Pretty solid size. Pretty solid sample size. All right. So now let's move to our number 2 point for today. The sentiment on Bitcoin and Ethereum diverging. This might not come as a surprise to many who've seen how the markets seem to have split a bit, but break this down a little bit for us, because this is very significant at the moment.
Yeah, so we had gone over this a couple weeks ago on Bitcoin and altcoin sentiment diverging. So if you look at this chart here, the blue line is Bitcoin average sentiment score, the red line is Ethereum. So we see that it's not always the same, right? There are times in July 2018, for example, where Bitcoin sentiment had been positive and Ethereum sentiment had been more negative. What we saw at halfway through or towards the end of Q2 and into Q3, there was a 28-day period where Bitcoin sentiment continued to rise more and more positive from a 30-day average point of view when Ethereum sentiment went negative. So we're seeing that gap is closing a bit, but we're starting to see more of a divergence, and I think that may symbolize kind of a movement, which I think is needed, of a separation between the price of Bitcoin and Ethereum and all other altcoins. So I don't think it's happened yet, but I think it started to happen a bit with Bitcoin dominance increasing, and I think that trend is going to continue, and I think this signifies that in a way.
Does the data pair out that we can sort of base that on some of the larger macro issues going on, whether we're talking about Libra, congressional hearings, President Trump's tweets? I mean, did those sort of factors weigh into the fact that Bitcoin is seeing a resurgence perhaps compared to the alts?
I think that maybe in a way that Libra brings in a new audience. And that new audience tends to, like, I know when I first got into crypto, my first foray into crypto a few years ago was into Bitcoin. So that potentially could be part of it. But I think we're also starting to see a bit of a separation in price, and sentiment does tend to lead price, but there are also times where sentiment obviously follows price, right? Because if the price is going down by 80%, people are just not going to be positive, right? So I think it's probably a combination of a few different things.
Interesting to see those different factors at play. All right, and now turning to our number 1 point for today, taking a look at the fact that as much as we've seen market cap dominance on the rise for Bitcoin, also tweets are on the up. What can you tell us?
And trading volume as well, which we should have probably included here. But yeah, so Bitcoin's share, and this relates to the last point we had in terms of Bitcoin and Ethereum sentiment diverging, is that Bitcoin's share of the overall crypto market cap is rising almost to new highs, as well as tweet dominance. So if we look in late 2018, early 2019, you see that massive dip in tweet dominance, which is that blue line there, to below 30%. And we've actually seen more recently multiple days in Q2 where Bitcoin accounted for more than 60% of overall crypto tweets. That hadn't happened since December 2017. So a lot of these trends go back to these things hadn't happened since December 2017, where the price went up to $20,000. So I think the combination of all these factors is very interesting.
And looking into the longer term frames, it looked like Bitcoin, according to the sentiment data, is likely to keep its market dominance. I mean, the sort of high to mid 60s percentages of the total market cap. Does that seem to be a trend that's likely set to continue?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're kind of in a wait and see period with that. But if tweet volume dominance continues to rise, if more and more, we're seeing more users coming into the market and those users are talking about Bitcoin, I think that that's going to correlate well, right? If people are talking about it, that's probably what people are trading. And as altcoins underperform Bitcoin as well, I think that inherently, right, if altcoins are going down, Bitcoin's going up, its percentage of the market is going to go up as well. So I think it's once again, it's a combination of a few different factors. But sentiment on Bitcoin being more positive than alternative currencies does point to Bitcoin's market cap dominance continuing to rise.
Certainly, but given we've got a bit of a dip going on at the moment, some are calling that this will be a considerable pullback, at least in the short term. Do you yourself have any predictions for where you see Bitcoin headed in the weeks and months ahead?
I don't make price predictions. I'm not your guy, but I do think that from a long-term point of view, Bitcoin is very, very, very healthy. We've seen a lot in the past, we see these massive run-ups. I mean, Bitcoin I think it was in Q1 ran up from like $4,000 to $12,000 or something. So, if the price of an asset triples within a couple months, it's bound to have, a slight correction. And, if we look at sentiment from a long-term point of view, it's actually continued to increase. So we have a metric. So daily sentiment, which we showed here, looks at conversations today versus a 7-day interval. We have a metric called long-term sentiment, which looks at the last 50 days versus a 200-day interval. And that number's continued to rise and is actually almost in bullish territory. So it's very, very close to being in full bullish territory. Its lowest point was December 2018, and it's now reaching numbers we haven't seen since early 2018, late 2017. So while I can't tell you when Bitcoin is going to go up, I can tell you that I'm pretty confident that it is. We have not seen Bitcoin's new all-time high. Whether it's going to be in 6 months or a year or 2 years or 3 years, I'm not sure. But I do have a suspicion that it's going to continue to rise.
All right, certainly plenty of interesting stuff to pair out in that data. I want to thank you so much, Joshua Frank from The Tie, for being here with us in studio today. A rare honor, much appreciated. So much interesting data and information to break down there. A key element to look and keep watching the crypto sphere for all the latest in sentiment data. And of course, stay with us at blocktv.com for all the latest in news and information. I'm Asher Westrop Evans. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.